Hey there, and welcome back to the channel. Today we gonna take a look at some never-before-seen pictures from 1944 when Soviet troops found a secret Nazi gas chamber. In 1944, World War II was raging. The Nazis were feeling pressure from the Soviet forces who had pushed them all the way back to Germany. This gave the Soviets the perfect excuse to push into Poland and set up a base of operations for their imminent assault on the city. On October that year, the Red Army drove into the small town of Majdanek, located about 20 miles from Lublin. They expected to find military installations and perhaps some weapons. What they found instead would haunt them forever. The Nazis were losing ground quickly, but that didn't stop them from hiding their heinous crimes from their enemies. After they seized Poland, the Germans built barbed wire fences and guard towers around it and brought in their first prisoners, 2,000 Jewish men and women from the nearby town of Zamosk. But if they couldn't complete the task or weren't working fast enough, they were sent straight to the gas chambers. Wherever the Nazis went, they instituted laws restricting the rights of Jewish citizens. They were banned from owning businesses, holding government jobs, or even walking in public spaces without being harassed. And that was just the beginning. This policy of genocide was known as the final solution. It was the Nazi plan to wipe out every single Jew in the world. While the Soviets were horrified at what they found at the camp, they were familiar with what was happening here. This hatred reached such a fever pitch that people stopped seeing Jews as human beings. To them, they were vermin, pests to be exterminated for the good of society. But no one took them seriously until he was elected Chancellor of Germany. With him at the helm, anti-Semitism became a state-sponsored practice. Homes and businesses were looted, and anyone who tried to flee was shot on sight. Anyone with 3 or more Jewish grandparents was considered Jewish, even if they didn't follow the religion. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 defined who was considered Jewish. It was carried out by members of the Nazi Party and their supporters, and it left hundreds of Jewish businesses destroyed and thousands of Jews arrested. As the Nazis consolidated their power, they opened dozens of camps across German-occupied Europe. Some of the worst were Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec. Together, they were responsible for the deaths of more than 2 million people. And no matter if they were German citizens or not, they were suddenly banned from voting, holding government jobs, and marrying non-Jews. Now they were bringing Jews to these camps voluntarily. It seemed counterintuitive, but there was a method to their madness. They were like factories, turning out dead bodies like products. They needed a systematic approach, a way to round up and kill Jews quickly and efficiently. That's why they built the camps. In fact, many of them saw it as a good thing. The Nazis lied to the Jewish people about why they were being taken away. If you think the KKK is scary, you should see what the Nazis were doing during the Holocaust. Well, it was all about deception. The Nazis had realized the jig was up. There was no way they were going to win the war. So why not go out with a bang? By the time the war ended, over 6 million Jews were dead. But the legacy of the Holocaust lives on through the survivors and the artifacts they left behind. Sometimes they said they were being relocated to another part of town. Other times they said they were being taken to work in factories or farms. But really, they were being transported to death camps. When the Soviets entered Poland in 1944, they knew something terrible was happening, but they didn't know the half of it. Many were sent directly to the gas chambers, while others were forced to work until they died of exhaustion or starvation. Thanks for watching. These people were forced to build the infrastructure of the prison camp itself, including the infamous gas chambers. The ongoing conflict in World War II was taking a toll on the German people. Food was becoming scarce, and many people were living in poverty. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one. Hitler needed someone to blame, and he chose the Jews once again. But today we're going to find out just how well those secret war crimes could really be hidden. From the moment Hitler came to power, the Nazis spread hateful propaganda about Jews. They blamed Jews for every problem in Germany, from economic hardship to the country's defeat in World War I. As German troops marched across the countryside, they were accompanied by special Einsatzgruppen, special units whose job it was to hunt down and kill every Jew they could find. Between 1941 and 1945, Einsatzgruppen traveled throughout Eastern Europe, killing more than 2 million people. They created a system of scapegoating, making Jews the fall guys whenever anything went wrong. It worked surprisingly well. At the time it was discovered, it was still in operation, but it would be the last time it ever ran. The majority of these were Jewish men, women, and children. But Soviet soldiers weren't the first ones to find the camp. The site would later be identified as Majdanek concentration camp. Members of the Polish resistance had already been there before them. It was the first major death camp to be liberated by the Allies, and it revealed the horrifying truth behind the final solution: the Nazi plan to exterminate all Jews in Europe. It soon became clear that this wasn't just a military installation, but a prison camp. And as they continued their search, they uncovered even more horrible details. They found barracks where prisoners were kept, as well as gas chambers and crematoria where they were killed. On July 1944, the Polish resistance in Warsaw rose up against the occupying Germans. When they searched the buildings, they found documents, equipment, and other items related to medicine, as well as what appeared to be prison cells. The Nazis had been running the facility since March of 1942. It's estimated that around 75,000 people were murdered at Majdanek between its opening and its closure in 1944. Before the Nazi occupation, Majdanek was a small farm with some outbuildings and a pond. The prisoners were forced to work 16 hours a day building whatever the Nazis wanted. Shockingly, the Nazis weren't even sorry for what they were doing to Jews. As World War II raged on, they had already learned the terrible truth about German-occupied territories. During the war, the Nazis committed numerous atrocities against European Jews. Entire communities were rounded up and deported to ghettos. The Nazis had been systematically rounding up Jews across Europe and transporting them to camps like Majdanek, where they were worked to death or killed immediately upon arrival. But why? It all started with propaganda. The German people embraced the Nazi message wholeheartedly and began hating Jews as much as Hitler did. And where did that leave the Nazi conscience? For years, members of the Nazi Party had been vocal about their opposition to Jews even before Hitler came to power. The Nazis began passing laws that stripped Jews of their citizenship, their property, and their very humanity. Things got worse with the Kristallnacht in 1938. This was a series of coordinated attacks on Jewish businesses, homes, and synagogues across Germany and Austria. With tensions high in Europe, the Nazis needed a scapegoat. In 1941, Hitler ordered the invasion of the Soviet Union. All of this led up to the establishment of the Majdanek concentration camp and others like it. But why did the Nazis build these camps? Up until then, when the Nazis killed Jews, it was usually a spontaneous act of violence. If the Nazis wanted to kill every Jew in Europe, they couldn't do it all at once. But how did they convince people to come to these camps? Once they arrived, there was no escape. As the Soviet army pushed the Nazis further and further back, they liberated more and more concentration camps. But each new camp was worse than the last. They killed everyone who remained in the camps, including the guards and officers. What do you think? Have you ever heard of the Majdanek concentration camp? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.